There's a lot of specs and there's a lot of jargon in the TV world, and the vast majority of it is completely irrelevant to what makes a TV good and what makes a TV bad. LED, LCD, and plasma. People commonly refer to LCD and LED as two different TV types. That's not exactly the case. LCD is both types. It's just the difference is that traditional LCDs were backlit with a fluorescent tube, and nowadays LCDs are backlit by LED lights. For the longest time, the general consensus was that plasma TVs had the best video. That has slowly faded because some of the LED LCD's pictures are so good. Sharp has the Elite line now, which is an LED LCD type, that the picture is fantastic. Where LED LCD beats plasma sufficiently is with energy efficiency. So if you can get an LED LCD that is as good picture quality as a plasma, it's gonna win on a lot of other factors that a plasma just can't. It's gonna be more energy efficient, it's not gonna be nearly as thick, it's not gonna be nearly as heavy. So where plasma really fits into the equation nowadays is if you have an install where energy efficiency, thickness doesn't matter, cost is maybe an issue, because plasmas are still relatively cheaper. That might be the reason you would go for plasma. The picture is going to be better on a plasma than a conventional LCD in almost all cases. One of the big buzzwords with TVs that's super annoying to me is refresh rates. The reason this is annoying to me is because when you talk about 120 hertz and 240 hertz and all of these other cycles, films are shot at 24 frames per second. If you're getting into 120 and 240, it's not like the content that you're watching is 120 and 240. It's still 24 frames per second. So TV manufacturers, to make up for this, they have all their own proprietary technology like True Motion and Auto Motion. Depending on the brand, they've got some gimmicky name that's associated with it. And what they do is they add frames artificially to the frames that aren't actually there. And to my eyes, it looks worse. I think a film looks like a film. I think you should keep it that way. I think all of that extra motion sync technology, unless you're watching sports and you want it to look like you're literally standing there, it typically makes the viewing worse. One of the statistics that actually matters is contrast ratio, and that's sort of the difference between the darkest dark and the whitest white. This essentially is what determines the depth of your picture. So if you're watching a super dark movie like The Dark Knight, if the TV doesn't have good black level, a lot of that darker imagery is just going to turn into mush, and a lot of that shadow detail you're just not going to see. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if the TV doesn't have good whites, things that are super bright, they're just going to get washed out, and you're not going to be able to see a whole lot of detail in like a white backdrop type area. There's two different ways you can backlight an LED TV. There's edge-lit and there's backlit. The main advantage with edge-lit is that you can typically get the TV skinnier. Backlit TVs, because if you envision a TV and then there's LEDs behind it, if it's edge lit around the sides of it, the screen can actually recess back into the enclosure further, so the LEDs are powered from the side. Or if you're completely backlit, you have to make room in that TV casing for all of those LEDs that are going to backlight it. The advantage with backlit though is that you can get darker darks because you can essentially turn an LED off as dark as you can get it. Whereas with edge lit, there's nothing behind it that would be turned off. It's all mirrors and engineering that's beyond the scope of this conversation. But just know that backlit LEDs, you can typically get better black ratios. The difference between 1080p and 1080i is what's called progressive scanning and interlace scanning. It's a hard thing to describe without actually seeing a picture, but progressive scanning, it basically takes as the frame rate changes, it fluctuates from the top of the screen, or the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen in one fluid pattern. Whereas with interlaced, it's sort of every frame skips a set of bars. So for people that are sports fans, progressive scanning typically looks better than interlace scanning because interlace scanning can create hazing in motion. So 1080p is a better picture than a 1080i picture. You can even make the case that a 720p picture can look better on some TVs than a 1080i picture because progressive scanning, you'll see fluid motion better as opposed, even though the resolution isn't necessarily as high. But it's debatable. What viewing angle is essentially if you're staring at the TV and you move to the left or the right of the TV, how much does that picture fluctuate depending on where you're standing? In the past, traditional LCD TVs did not have very good viewing angles because the way the backlit worked, it would alter a lot of the way the color looked depending on where you were standing around it. Auto brightness, everybody has their own brand name for it, but essentially what it does is it allows the TV to adjust its brightness depending on the brightness of the room. In theory, this can be cool, but in practice, it can be kind of annoying because you can visualize the brightness actually changing in front of your eyes, and it's distracting. I typically turn features like that off. To me, it's just overkill and not necessary. So 3D technology is really on the rise. After Avatar came out, TV manufacturers were really pumped that everybody was going to just go out and buy 3D TVs. So every major manufacturer put out 3D TVs on the market for twice as much as their regular TVs. And it kind of works. At this point, almost all of the high-end TVs have 3D technology built into them, and it's sort of just like an extra. They haven't rolled out enough content to where it really matters, but the studio manufacturers of Motion Picture Society would really like you to buy their expensive 3D Blu-ray. Smart TV capabilities. So what smart TV capabilities are is essentially things like Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, web services that allow you to stream movies direct from the internet. There's boxes that do a better job than the TV in terms of handling that kind of stuff. At my own house, I have an Apple TV and a Roku, and I've got a PS3, so I don't need smart TV capabilities. In my house, I just have a nice plasma TV, and that's it. And that's all I need. I just need my TV to look good. I don't need any of the extras that come with it. But at this point, they're pretty much bundling all that with all the high-end TVs anyway. You may use it, you may not. In terms of brands, I stick to the 3 S's: Samsung, Sony, Sharp. You can't really go wrong with those 3 because they've been around for decades, and their TVs are just solid. You very, very rarely run into problems with those brands. From a custom installer's perspective, a lot of the feature sets that are standard on almost every single Sony or Sharp TV just aren't built into some of those cheaper TV lines. You're not going to be able to do any sort of custom programming with them. You're not going to have a lot of the driver databases and things that allow you to do anything with it aside from just using it as just a straight up TV. You also have the quality control element of it. Those TVs, they're much more assembly line than some of the more name brands.